There are only two things you need to do in order to achieve an orbit in RP-1. Get yourself out of the atmosphere and build enough horizontal velocity so you'll miss the ground. You just need a measly 7.8 kilometers per second. Okay, perhaps not so measly, but you gotta start somewhere, and this advanced biological experiment contract is most certainly a step in the right direction, forcing me to design a spacecraft that will hold an advanced organism, like a monkey or a dog, get it a third of the way to orbital velocity, and return the animal safely to the surface. As well, this will be my first craft that will need to operate in a vacuum, forcing me to explore how to add a reaction control system to the vessel. Let's get started. I'm very eager to finish off one of the two programs that I've been working on since the start of this series, and I'm closer than I think. I thought I had two contracts left under Suborbital Rocket Research. First, Advanced Biological Suborbital Experiment and Advanced Biological Suborbital Experiment. But despite the bright red all-cap letters, I missed the fact that the first of these two is the capstone contract for the program. Either way, the contract requires me to build a craft with the advanced biological capsule and 200 units of sounding payload and get it to an altitude of over 140 kilometers with a surface velocity of 2,200 meters per second. The other contract is very much the same, except you need a surface velocity of 2,800 meters per second. The thing is, the advanced biological capsule isn't due to be unlocked for over a month, so instead, I first attempted to get the capstone contract of the Suborbital Rocket Development Program, Downrange Milestone 5,000 kilometers. I completed the 3,000 kilometer contract last episode, so I figured it wouldn't be too tough to push a similar rocket to 5,000 kilometers. It turned out to be tougher than I thought. After optimizing the ascent profile of last episode's rocket, I tried waiting until apogee before firing the Aerobee engine on the upper stage. Remember, reaction wheels aren't the thing that they are in the stock game, so I had to learn how to use RCS in Realism Overhaul. In mockery of my efforts, this strategy turned out to be much worse in terms of downrange distance than simply lighting the engine at staging. However, my newfound knowledge of using RCS in Realism Overhaul will pay off just a little later in this video. I then looked at how this rocket would perform after upgrading the V2's A4 engine to the A9. You can do this in simulation mode without having to spend the 40,000 funds for the upgrade, which is a good thing because my finances are still too tight to afford that. After optimizing the V2 for this new improved engine, I still found I wasn't even close. I even tried having two stacked Aerojet SRBs to kick off the upper stage, as well as trying a cluster of the much lighter R103 SRBs. My best efforts couldn't crack 4,000 kilometers downrange, let alone 5,000 kilometers, so I put this contract aside until I could afford to build a brand new and more powerful rocket, and focused instead on the first advanced biological suborbital experiment contract. The description of the advanced biological capsule states that it contains a monkey or a small dog, and of course returning the sample is crucial for scientific and ethical reasons. The blue background indicates that this part is currently still being researched, but that research should be complete before the integration of this rocket is finished. I can start the build anyway and just edit in the biological capsule once it's ready. The first mammal launched into space was Albert II, a rhesus monkey aboard a V2 rocket in February of 1947. Launched from White Sands, New Mexico, the V2 achieved an altitude of 134 kilometers. Unfortunately, Albert II died when his parachute failed to deploy, something that also happened with Albert I, whose rocket only achieved an altitude of around 50 or 60 kilometers. In fact, the death of these animals during this time period was more common than not. The first mammals to survive a trip into space were two dogs, Segan and Dezik, aboard a Soviet R-1 rocket in July of 1951. The contract requires a successful recovery of not only the biological capsule, but also of 200 units of sounding payload, which I'm going to assume consists of life support and monitoring equipment for the animal. My initial plan was to simply place this equipment under the nose cone of my V2 number 3 rocket, which you saw 2 episodes ago, with the idea that it will separate after reaching the required altitude and return to the surface. To clean up the gap, I used the fairings from the Procedural Fairings mod. You start by picking from the variety of bases available, all of which are procedural. The fairing shape is automatically generated and outlined in blue. You can go with that shape or turn off the auto shape and choose your own dimensions. The procedural fairings themselves are added on as a separate part and will snap to the shape outlined in blue, though you can continue to adjust the shape through the base's context menu. This iteration failed to achieve the necessary altitude. To save weight, I abandoned putting the avionics in the nose cone and instead fashioned a new near-Earth avionics package placed under the fairing base that won't be recovered. Note again how the fairing shape is automatically forming this nice egg about my payload. This iteration did achieve a 2,200 meter per second surface speed while pushing its apogee over 140 kilometers. I thought I was all set, but then the light dawned. Oh, you gotta get... Oh my god! I think you need to have both of these at the same time. Yup, for this contract I need to be above 140 kilometers in altitude and traveling at a surface speed of over 2,200 meters per second at the same time. And for that, I decided I needed to build myself my first spacecraft. We'll start with an avionics core. I figure around 800 meters per second should be enough to comfortably get to the speed I need. I still want to put it atop the V2, so I'll make the diameter the same as the diameter of the biological capsule, as I know that will fit inside a fairing comfortably. I then added on the 200 units of sounding payload. I need this to be as light as possible, but after configuring what is going to have to be a near-Earth avionics package, I realize this may be getting bigger than I want. For propulsion, I played with the idea of using separation motors or small SRBs, but they didn't give me anywhere near what I needed for Delta V, so I added on an aluminum high-pressure procedural tank, and then an Aerobee engine, the same one that goes all the way back to the Whack Corporal from the first episode. I got a good Delta V in thrust to weight, even after I increased the mass limit on the avionics to 1 ton. The Aerobee does require ullage, but I'm hoping that I can provide that with RCS, something the vessel is going to need anyway to maintain attitude control once in space. There are lots of options for thruster ports, but I went with 4 of the lighter angled RCS block 28-45 N class. The default is for these to use compressed nitrogen gas, though that can be switched to helium at no extra cost, or even upgraded to high test peroxide for 10,000 funds. I left them on nitrogen for now, and then tweaked the blocks to the 3-way variant with the 3rd port pushing forward. Under the control tab, you can tweak the individual actuation toggles, just like in the stock game. I disabled roll and lateral translation except for forward-aft, as I need that to provide ullage. I also added 4 more RCS blocks further forward on the vessel, but I soon realized that they aren't necessary if I don't care about lateral translation. The tank providing nitrogen needs to be pressurized, and obviously I went with aluminum to minimize weight. You can then select fill with nitrogen for the thruster blocks. I then shrunk down the length of the tank and simulated it into low orbit to see if this prototype will actually work. Okay, RCS is on. H to provide some forward thrust. Throttle up. And stage. That works. Monkey ship. I clearly don't need these blocks that are at the top, so I'll get rid of those. I also don't need anywhere near this amount of nitrogen. The rest of this was really just shaping the tanks to make it look a bit better. To reduce the work the parachutes had to do, I put a procedural ring decoupler between the sounding payload and the fuel tanks. The nitrogen tank got reduced down to just a small hump onto which the engine was mounted. I eventually reduced the utilization on that tank so it only held 1.17 kiloliters of the compressed gas. And after simulating one more test in orbit, the vessel that was ready to be mounted on top of my V2 had a mass under 800 kilograms and a vacuum delta V of 805 meters per second. I mounted it on the V2 you saw me fiddling with earlier with no additional modifications, other than the fairing which automatically resized to the new payload. Of course, testing of the integrated vessel immediately followed, where I discovered that I had to be careful with the performing of the burn at apogee, as it was really easy to start the burn too late and fall back below 140 kilometers in altitude before reaching the required 2,200 meters per second. Conversely, if I started too early or pitched up too much, I could run out of fuel before getting to the necessary speed. It turned out a bit of practice was in order. I also textured and colored the ship that was now dubbed the Albert-1, but I'll leave that for the reveal a little later. Not surprisingly, there was a lot of tooling that needed to be done. 21,000 funds worth, in fact. Don't forget, I can't integrate the biological capsule until after it is researched, so that had to be removed before it was handed over to my engineers. I also made a last-minute change from the radial parachute to the cone parachute, mostly for looks, but it also turned out to be a tad lighter once it was configured for the payload. Shortly into the new year of 1955, the researchers finished their work on the early science tech node, allowing me to edit in the advanced biological capsule. Though unrelated to this build, I also decided to hire 12 more researchers to speed up the unlocking of further tech nodes, but other than that, there was nothing stopping me from time warping away the remaining 5 months to the launch of the Albert-1/V2 number 3. We are off. McJeb is now taking control of our spacecraft. As far as this ascent program goes, pretty much the same deal as what you've seen with previous V2 number 3 launches. Nothing really new there. Bit of changes in terms of deploying the payload at the appropriate time, but no new ideas presented at all. Right now, what we got to do is, hopefully our V2 number 3 will get our apoapsis up to its required at least 140 kilometers. And by the end of this, Albert will hopefully become our first primate in space. I don't have any kind of abort. Oh shoot, I just jinxed it by saying that. I won't say the A word until this thing has run its course. Okay, we're coming towards the end of our burn here. You can see the fuel's getting pretty low. 90 kilometers on apogee, 100 kilometers, 110, 20, 30, 40, 47, 147 kilometers on the apogee. Disengage McJeb. We don't need that anymore. KOS is taking control. It's locked it onto the prograde vector. It'll do the best it can, but of course we're only on our aerodynamic control surfaces. But once we are on our spacecraft, we should have RCS for the first time, so that'll be exciting. At 100 kilometers, we should be deploying our fairings. That's being handled by a smart part over here. Sometimes it's easier just to do that than to get everything done with KOS, or you could do it yourself, obviously, too. And boom, there goes our fairing. We can now see our Albert-1 spacecraft. That is going to be staged and released at 120 kilometers. And then at that point, KOS is shutting down, and I'm going to take control of this spacecraft. Remember, we still got to get it up to 2,200 meters per second while above 140 kilometers. Okay. So there we go. We are now disengaged. We can put on our SAS and, yeah, we'll shut this down. We'll stage to engage and put on that and lock it onto the prograde vector. And in my experience, you want to start this sooner rather than later. So I'm actually going to take a manual control of this. Put on Z. There we go. That's to give us the ullage we need. And then stage the aerobee. There we go. We're off. Got to get this all over with. Don't forget, it's the surface speed we're looking at, not the orbital speed. See, our window has opened, so Albert is taking in the view. Don't forget, this is the WAC Corporal variant of the AeroB engine. There's still 2 upgrades that I have paid for that I could apply to this. As well, the V2 was working on the A4 engine, not the upgraded A9 engine. So I could get a lot more performance out of this than I am. And that is encouraging considering that there is a 2800 meter per second version of this contract as well. So I'm just going to keep it a little bit close to the prograde vector, but when that prograde vector dips below the horizon, I don't want to dip below the horizon with it. I want to keep my speed up. That's the thing. We're still going up. Our speed is now 2100 meters per second. That is encouraging. Okay. Oh, I put a lot of altitude into this, didn't I? Yes, I did. Okay, that's it. Green, green, green. Let's shut down that. Okay. So there we go. And what we can do is we should have a little bit of nitrogen left. Yeah. I'm going to spin this around and just try and slow down a little bit. I don't want to go any faster than I need to. Try and give Albert as comfortable a ride as we can. So I'm just going to put this onto retrograde. And we're just going to push H and take off a little bit of this speed. Doesn't look like we're taking off speed because we're falling. Okay, actually, oh, I just ran out. Okay, so that is that. We're dead. Not dead. We're out. So we're going to stage that away. I was hoping to push that off to the side a bit with my last bit of nitrogen, but I did not time that very well. So unfortunately, that is that. Our door is closed because we have stopped collecting the science. But in testing, I noticed that it did not collect any appreciable amount of science. If we take a look at... Let's take a look at the biological sample here. You can see it's not even giving me a percentage. It takes it's a full day duration to collect all 10 kilograms of this particular science, and the whatever seconds we were above 140 weren't enough. No, I think the idea of this part is that you put it into orbit. So Albert and his predecessors will have some work still cut out for them. But right now, we are just about leaving space. There we go. We're below the Kármán line once again. Our parachute is armed. No, it looks like, yeah, our speed's still pretty high. There's also the issue of re-entry heating during testing. That wasn't an issue, but there is a question, here we go, of just how much heating can we withstand without getting into any kind of thermal protection. There we go. It seems to like this whole kind of sideways bit. Alright, but that didn't seem to be so bad. We've lost communication because our tower has dipped below the horizon. What we gotta do is get ourselves to 5 kilometers for those parachutes. We have slowed down very nicely. There we go. A little bit of a different look for our parachutes, but I figure Albert deserves it. All we have to do now is wait for splashdown and we're done. Alright, there we go. Contract has gone green. That is all good. What else did we got? Oh, we got some. I should check those out. But we'll recover our vessel. This is going to be a normal recovery. Okay, so what do we got here? Yeah, there's no science from our biological sample. Absolutely zero. So 0 science collected. That's okay. Got some funds back, of course. Let's just check out our notifications here. We have contract complete. First advanced biological suborbital experiment. Well done. Our subject survived and our scientists are now examining it and the collected data. 57 reputation for that. And then program complete. Oh, what? Oh my gosh! I thought there was another one! We have achieved the objectives to set forth in the Suborbital Research Program, and it can now be completed in the administration building. Oh my gosh! The Suborbital Rocket Research, this guy was optional. Optional! This guy was the capstone. Read! They put it in red for you. So that means I could go into the administrative building and I could pick up another program. Okay, so I guess I just check this off, which gets me 70 reputation. But do I lose what's left of the funding? Just a sec, what does the optional biological experiment contract get me? 57 reputation and 270 confidence. And of course there's rewards associated with whatever new program I decide to pick up. I've got some decisions to make, but that's going to have to be for the beginning of next episode. In the meantime, I thank you for watching and hope to see you again next time.